The sky over Germany is a silent gray, broken only by the distant drone of engines. One lone B-17 cuts through the clouds, its metal skin rattling from flak. Inside, the pilot sits calm, hands steady on the controls, eyes scanning instruments and sky alike. Around him, his crew braces, expecting chaos. Suddenly, a series of German fighters appear on the horizon, banking to intercept. Anti-aircraft fire blooms below. The men tense. But he doesn't flinch. Every minor movement, every decision flows with precision the others cannot see. A whisper of a command, almost too soft to hear, sets the crew into motion. Maneuvers, countermeasures, a hidden weapon deployed they hadn't known the plane carried. The Germans falter, then retreat, confused. The crew looks at him, doubt lingering in their eyes. He allows a brief, almost imperceptible nod. He is not just a pilot. And tonight, what they underestimated will rewrite the skies. The hangar smelled of fuel oil and the faint tang of cold metal. Dawn had not yet broken, but the B-17 sat ready under the dim lights, its frame massive, silent, and waiting. Crew members moved around it in practiced rhythm, checking panels, tightening straps, adjusting radios. The air vibrated with quiet anticipation, a tension that only those who flew knew. He stepped forward, boots echoing softly against the concrete floor. No one paid him more than a passing glance. To them, he was simply another pilot, steady but unremarkable, the kind of officer who followed procedure without fanfare. His eyes, however, scanned every detail with a precision born of countless hours in the sky and a discipline honed by missions that never left the record. He crouched beside the left wing, inspecting the flaps and control surfaces. Fingers traced rivets and seams, feeling for stress, for signs that a hurried maintenance crew might have missed. A slight frown crossed his face. One bolt was not seated perfectly. He tightened it carefully, silently, making a mental note of the minor imbalance. No one would notice. No one needed to. The navigator approached with the morning manifest. "All set for briefing?" he asked, voice careful. "Almost," the pilot replied, his tone even, calm, unshakable. He gestured to the charts, adjusting them subtly, aligning flight paths with a level of foresight that went unnoticed. The navigator nodded, trusting but unaware of the depth of calculation behind each line and number. Inside the cockpit, the instruments gleamed under the low lights. He ran through checklists with meticulous care. Engine gauges, altimeters, fuel ratios, radio frequencies. The crew followed along, some checking, others watching him. None questioned him, but all felt a quiet reassurance in his precision. It was the kind of competence that went unseen, assumed, undervalued. As the engines roared to life, the vibrations beneath the floor resonated through his body. The propellers cut the cold air, each rotation measured, efficient. The crew shifted, adjusting headsets and straps, their eyes flicking to him for guidance. He did not give speeches, did not shout commands. Instead, his calm presence orchestrated the room, a conductor invisible in the midst of rising noise. He remembered the last mission, the one that had left a scar deeper than any wound. Faces of men he couldn't save flashed for a moment, a memory tucked behind the precision of routine. He suppressed it, letting the training take over. Guilt lingered, a quiet hum beneath his composed exterior, a reminder that expertise alone could never erase loss. Outside, the hangar doors began to open. Pale light spilled across the tarmac. The other planes waited in formation, engines already running, crews poised. He gave the signal to taxi, smooth, controlled. The B-17 moved, massive and deliberate, a machine of metal and coordination brought to life by human hands. Through the windshield, he scanned the horizon. Clouds stretched thin, the sky a washed canvas of gray. No immediate threat, no enemy aircraft yet, but his eyes missed nothing. The subtle flicker of distant radar towers, the faint glint of distant flak positions, the rhythm of the wind across the airfield. Awareness was muscle memory. Anticipation was instinct. The bombardier approached the cockpit door, ready to climb in. "Weather looks clear," he said, but the pilot's sharp glance at the altimeter and the barometric readings suggested a cautious doubt. Clouds could hide a storm. Enemy patrols could hide behind them. Every variable mattered. He did not speak of his thoughts. He did not need to. His silence carried authority. The crew responded without realizing why, adjusting straps, checking weapons, running final diagnostics. His competence set the tone, though it went unnoticed in casual observation. As the B-17 taxied to the runway, the roar of engines filled the air. He guided the plane with subtle corrections, hands steady, feet precise. Crew members gripped seats, some uneasy at the growl beneath them, others simply accustomed to the routine. None saw the mind-calculating enemy approaches, flak trajectories, or the hidden potential in the plane they trusted blindly. A final glance across the formation. The pilot's eyes met the horizon. Soon the mission would begin. Soon, danger would arrive, testing every calculation, every instinct, every ounce of skill he had honed in silence. But for now the world was still. The B-17 waited. And he, underestimated and unseen, prepared to turn that waiting into quiet authority. The engine surged. Wheels lifted. And the flight began, calm, precise, and entirely under his control. The sky stretched gray and unbroken, but something in the air shifted. The hum of engines carried a faint irregularity, almost imperceptible to an untrained ear. He noticed it immediately, leaning slightly forward in the cockpit, eyes scanning instruments, the horizon, the thin clouds ahead. Subtle movements in the formation, deviations too small for most to see, hinted at trouble. The navigator frowned, tracing the plotted course on the map. "Radar picking up unusual activity, sir," he said, voice low. "Not in our expected zones." He nodded, calm. "Adjust altitude. Keep formation tight. Minimal course corrections. Watch for movement above 12,000 feet. His words were measured, unemotional, but carried weight the crew instinctively followed. The men exchanged uncertain glances, unsure why his single instruction seemed to settle their nerves. Outside the cockpit, clouds shifted like a slow tide, concealing the first signs of the enemy. He knew the Luftwaffe had increased patrols in this sector. They could strike at any moment, dive silently, and vanish just as quickly. He adjusted the plane's speed by a fraction of a mile per hour, a subtle maneuver designed to reduce detection risk, invisible to all but him. The bombardier squinted at the horizon. "Nothing yet," he said, trying to mask tension. "Nothing we can see," the pilot replied, voice steady. But his mind catalogued every possibility: the faint glint of sun on distant wings, the angle of the clouds, the subtle shimmer of radar echoes. Each was a thread in a pattern only he could perceive. The radio crackled. A voice, clipped and professional, reported an incoming squadron of enemy fighters, but the coordinates were vague. Multiple bogies, altitude unknown, approaching from northeast. The navigator adjusted the map, hands trembling slightly. He leaned over, tracing their trajectory with a finger, calculating intercept times, maneuver options, and potential escape routes. His thoughts were precise, fast, almost surgical. "They'll intercept at 15,000 feet. Prepare evasive protocols, but no action until we confirm. Keep eyes forward. Flak could be concentrated ahead." The crew moved on instinct, their motions faster, more coordinated under his silent orchestration. They adjusted straps, checked guns, ensured engines were operating optimally. No one spoke unnecessarily. The quiet tension filled the cockpit like a tangible presence. Minutes passed. Small flashes of anti-aircraft fire in the distance illuminated the clouds like distant lightning, brief and fleeting. The crew's anxiety grew, subtle but perceptible. He remained calm, masking the undercurrent of alertness that ran through him. Every motion, every glance, every word was controlled, restrained. Nothing dramatic. Nothing heroic. Just precision. He glanced at the crew, noting their positions. The co-pilot's hands gripped the controls too tightly. The tail gunner shifted uneasily in his seat. Even the navigator, usually steady, breathed shallowly. He made micro-adjustments to the plane's course, keeping them all aligned without a single shout or order beyond the minimal necessary. And then he saw it, a faint outline moving too fast, too deliberate just above the clouds. Shadows that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. He tapped the intercom once. "Eyes on 9 o'clock. Adjust slightly starboard." Quietly. The plane responded, obedient like an extension of his own body. Crew members complied automatically, unsure why, but trusting in his unspoken authority. The enemy was coming. And they would be the first to realize they had underestimated him. He allowed himself a brief, almost imperceptible breath. The storm was forming. The sky was no longer just gray, it was a battleground waiting to erupt. Every calculation mattered. Every decision counted. And yet, outwardly, he remained a calm, ordinary pilot, masked by routine and professionalism. The first warning had arrived. And he was ready, though no one around him fully understood how far ahead he already was. The clouds split, revealing a thin strip of pale sunlight over the horizon. For a moment, the crew allowed themselves a shallow breath, mistaking it for calm. It was not calm. A sudden glint in the distance caught his eye, a formation moving fast, precise, almost predatory. German fighters, weaving silently through the early morning haze, closing in on the B-17. The tail gunner stiffened, hands on the controls, voice tense. "Bogies on our 6 o'clock." He didn't flinch. Not externally. Not yet. His eyes flicked from instrument panel to horizon, calculating altitude, speed, angles. The B-17 was heavy, not agile. That was understood. But it was not defenseless. Every lever, pedal, switch, and control surface had a purpose he already knew intimately, a purpose the crew hadn't even been told about. "Steady," he said into the intercom, calm as a river, voice carrying the weight of authority without aggression. "Minor course adjustment. Keep formation tight. Watch left flank." The co-pilot's hands hesitated for a fraction of a second, then followed his subtle gesture. Flak began to bloom in the distance, black puffs appearing against the pale clouds like ink drops in water. The B-17 shuddered as the shock waves rippled through the fuselage, but he kept the plane level, precise, unflinching. From the rear, tracer fire cut through the sky. The tail gunner fired in bursts, following instinct rather than command, but he subtly adjusted the plane's heading to optimize defensive angles. Crew members caught on quickly, responding to his unspoken cues. They were still unsure why they trusted him so completely, but trust they did. The enemy fighters were skilled, Luftwaffe aces perhaps, or pilots trained in methodical, coordinated attacks. Yet each maneuver he executed disrupted them. Slight rolls, micro-adjustments in throttle, gentle banking, small, almost invisible movements that made targeting the B-17 difficult, even frustrating. One of the fighters broke formation and dove aggressively toward the bomber's left wing. The crew tensed, anticipating a collision. He assessed the angle, calculated speed and trajectory, and deployed a countermeasure hidden beneath the wing. A flash, a smoke trail, and suddenly the German pilot had misjudged distance. Flanked, destabilized, the enemy fighter broke off, surprised. A quiet murmur rippled through the crew. Some exchanged glances. He noticed it but did not acknowledge it. No nod. No smile. Only calm. Only control. Their eyes, however, were beginning to see that he was more than the steady pilot they thought they knew. The formation of fighters regrouped, circling, probing for weakness. His mind raced through possibilities, maneuver patterns, enemy psychology, wind currents, fuel ratios, mechanical limits. Each calculation made silently, with no need for dramatic gestures or raised voice. His authority was subtle, indirect, felt rather than stated. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Tracer fire came closer, flak puffs larger, more concentrated. One round struck the fuselage near the midsection, sending a vibration through the metal skeleton. Crew members flinched. He didn't. He made a subtle throttle adjustment, leveling the B-17, ensuring structural stress remained minimal. The bombardier called out, almost breathless, "Multiple fighters, starboard." He leaned forward, assessing again. His hands moved, gentle but decisive, tapping controls, adjusting trajectory, issuing a single command: "Keep steady. Watch formation. Fire only when locked." They obeyed. The crew, trained and competent, followed him as if they had no choice. And in a sense they didn't. Not because of rank, not yet, but because the quiet, restrained authority emanating from him had become the anchor amid chaos. One by one the enemy fighters faltered. The B-17's hidden defensive systems, subtle maneuvers, and his tactical foresight created confusion. Their attacks became disorganized, their cohesion shattered. The first wave passed, some retreating, others forced to regroup. The crew let out small, controlled exhalations. He remained in the cockpit, scanning, calculating, poised for the next strike. The sky was still dangerous, still alive with threats, but the first test had been passed. A glance around the cockpit revealed eyes now filled with something deeper than respect: realization. He was not just a pilot. He had orchestrated the defense with subtle mastery, and yet outwardly nothing about him had changed. The quiet, unassuming man they knew had been conducting war with invisible hands. The enemy had underestimated him, and they would continue to do so at their peril. The sky had darkened, clouds thickening as if drawn by some unseen hand. The first wave of German fighters had scattered, but they would return. He knew it. His eyes scanned the instruments, then the horizon, tracing invisible lines of threat and opportunity. The B-17 was no longer simply defending itself. It was about to become the hunter in a game the enemy didn't yet understand. "Crew, adjust formation. Starboard flank, tighten by 3 degrees, he said calmly, voice steady through the intercom. His command was brief, almost casual, but it carried authority that left no room for hesitation. The men complied, shifting with precision born of instinct, guided by his subtle influence. He tapped a lever beneath the cockpit panel, activating the plane's hidden countermeasures. They were not flashy, no explosive bursts, no cinematic displays, but they were effective, silent, and deadly to anyone who underestimated the B-17. The Germans had no knowledge of this system, and that ignorance would cost them. The tail gunner fired in measured bursts, synchronized perfectly with the slight banking maneuvers the pilot executed. Enemy fighters attempted to flank, but he anticipated each move, adjusting speed and altitude with minute corrections. It was a dance of mechanics and mind, of human skill and machine precision. 2 fighters closing from starboard, the co-pilot reported, voice tense. Angle 32 degrees, he replied. Adjust throttle incrementally. Lead with fuselage roll. Fire only when locked. Maintain formation integrity. Each instruction was calm, almost understated, yet executed flawlessly by the crew. The B-17 weaved through the sky with a quiet authority, its massive frame moving as if it had become an extension of his own body. The enemy tried to predict his next move, but each tactic he had prepared countered theirs. The Germans faltered. One fighter overshot, another misjudged the approach, and a third broke formation entirely, forced to retreat. The B-17's hidden capabilities, combined with his tactical foresight, created a rhythm the enemy could not follow. It was a measured, clinical destruction. No dramatics, no explosions in slow motion, just the cold arithmetic of war played out in precise maneuvers and calculated strikes. Flak ahead, dense, the navigator warned. He tilted the B-17 slightly, letting the plane's momentum absorb the shock while minimizing exposure to the anti-aircraft fire. A puff of smoke erupted near the wing, harmless but enough to rattle the crew. He remained calm, hands steady, eyes scanning the sky. Each adjustment was imperceptible but saved lives, preserved the plane, and maintained their advantage. Minutes stretched. The enemy regrouped, probing for weakness. He anticipated each maneuver, countering with minimal movements. His mind worked like a machine, tracking trajectories, calculating fuel consumption, assessing risk to crew and plane, factoring in wind, altitude, and enemy psychology. The bombardier reported another squadron approaching from higher altitude. He leaned forward, tracing their flight paths in his mind. They'll descend too fast if we hold altitude. Prepare defensive maneuvers but delay engagement until we have the positional advantage. The crew adjusted instinctively, trusting a man who, until now, had been quietly competent, unassuming, and precise. Their eyes began to see the pattern forming, the invisible authority guiding each movement. He did not flaunt it, did not speak of mastery, but it was undeniable. Then came the decisive moment. One German fighter attempted a high-speed pass along the B-17's starboard side. He rotated the plane slightly, triggering a defensive flare from the hidden system. The enemy miscalculated, caught off guard, and their attack failed. Another fighter followed, making the same error. Within minutes, the enemy formation began to fracture, disoriented and uncoordinated. The crew's breathing became more controlled, though their focus remained absolute. The pilot didn't allow himself relief. The tactical shift was only the beginning. Every movement, every adjustment, every command was measured. Lives depended on it, and he bore the weight silently, invisibly. Through the haze of clouds and flak, he allowed himself a fleeting thought. The Germans had no idea what they were facing. They underestimated him completely. Their errors were his leverage. Their overconfidence his opportunity. And though he commanded the B-17 with absolute precision, he did so with restraint, never risking unnecessary aggression, never showing the full force of what he was capable of. By the time the enemy fighters retreated again, battered and confused, the tactical shift was complete. The B-17 was no longer reacting, it was controlling the battlefield. Yet to the world outside, to anyone watching from below, it was just another bomber flying steadily through the sky, a quiet, unremarkable presence. Inside the cockpit, he allowed a brief, almost imperceptible nod to himself. The crew did not see it. They would never fully understand it. But he knew the pattern had been set. The Germans had misjudged him, misjudged the plane, misjudged the battle. And when the next wave came, he would be ready. The sky remained gray, tense, and watchful. But the shift had begun. The sky shifted again, now a bruised gray, heavy with the scent of cold rain and the distant echo of explosions. The first tactical victories had given them breathing space, but the Luftwaffe was not finished. A new wave of fighters emerged, more coordinated, more aggressive, their intent unmistakable. This time they would not retreat. He scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing. Anti-aircraft fire had grown denser, black puffs now larger, closer, punctuating the clouds like ominous drumbeats. The B-17 shuddered as a shell exploded near the fuselage, sending a sharp vibration through the hull. The crew flinched. He did not. Flak concentration increasing. "Brace for impact," the navigator warned. He leaned over the instrument panel, running silent calculations. Trajectories, angles of approach, enemy speed, the plane's center of gravity, engine performance. Each variable mattered. Adjusting throttle and rudder, he leveled the plane to absorb the shock of the flak, ensuring minimal stress on the fuselage. "Maintain altitude. Minor starboard drift. Guns on alert," he said calmly. His words were short, precise, carrying authority without alarm. The tail gunner fired in bursts, tracer rounds slicing the thickening clouds. One fighter banked aggressively from above, approaching the B-17's port wing. The co-pilot's hands trembled slightly on the yoke. He noticed, silently, and shifted posture just enough to signal, no words needed, that the maneuver was under control. The gunner's fire, combined with subtle banking of the plane, forced the fighter to overshoot. Another enemy misstep. But escalation was not limited to enemy attacks. The port engine began to stutter. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the cowling, and the hum of the propeller faltered. He reached for the throttle, stabilizing output, running quick mental diagnostics. The fuel mixture was uneven. A spark plug had fouled. Nothing catastrophic yet, but if ignored it could become one. "Engine 2 showing fluctuations," the co-pilot said. "Adjust fuel ratio. Maintain power at 78%. Do not overcompensate," he replied, fingers working over the levers, making imperceptible corrections. The plane steadied, vibration reduced. The crew didn't fully notice the skill behind it, they only knew that the plane continued to fly steadily, even under fire. Enemy fighters adapted, trying new angles, flanking more aggressively. He anticipated each variation, deploying the B-17's secret defensive system in tandem with micro-adjustments to flight path. Tracer fire crossed dangerously close to the fuselage, but the plane moved like a living organism, its massive weight responding to the pilot's invisible cues. One of the Germans attempted a coordinated climb and dive to box the B-17 in. He calculated the angle, the airspeed, the timing, and leaned forward, adjusting flaps by a fraction. The plane banked subtly, releasing a smoke flare from its concealed system. The enemy pilot misjudged the trajectory, lost cohesion, and collided with another fighter in the confusion. "Two down," the tail gunner muttered, awe creeping into his voice. "Focus on formation," the pilot replied, voice calm, almost monotone. No celebration, no acknowledgement. Control was still the mission, not ego. Amid the chaos, the crew could see it now. His competence was beyond ordinary, yet unannounced. His authority was indirect but undeniable. Each move he made was measured, precise, saving lives while imposing order on the storm. Yet restraint remained. No reckless maneuvers. No unnecessary risks. Every action balanced tactical gain against potential cost. The clouds thickened further, rain beginning to streak the windshield. Visibility dropped. Enemy fighters used it to their advantage, darting in and out of shadows. Flak intensified below. A second engine began to overheat under strain. He noted every detail silently, adjusting speed, bank, and altitude. His mind was a ledger of variables, balancing them all with the weight of responsibility. Minutes felt like hours. One miscalculation would mean disaster, but he did not falter. The crew trusted him instinctively, though they did not yet understand why. He anticipated enemy psychology, their fatigue, their desperation, and used it to guide the B-17 through the escalating storm. By the time the fighters began to falter again, several retreating, several lost to flak and misjudgment, the plane was battered but intact. Engines stabilized, flaps and rudders holding under constant strain. The tactical shift had expanded into a full-scale defensive mastery, executed without dramatic gestures, without heroics, but with ruthless efficiency. He allowed himself a momentary exhale, tension easing just slightly. Not relief. Relief was a luxury for the untested, but acknowledgement of survival, of control. The crew's eyes now held something deeper, quiet recognition of the man they had underestimated. He was no ordinary pilot. He had carried them through escalation without spectacle, without shouting, without overt authority. And he knew the final confrontation was coming. The Luftwaffe would not relent. The true test had yet to arrive. The clouds had turned steel gray, heavy with rain and the metallic scent of flak. The enemy had withdrawn temporarily, regrouping, but the threat remained imminent. He knew the next move would demand more than skill, it would demand judgment, the kind that weighed lives in seconds and carried consequences far beyond the cockpit. The navigator reported quietly, fuel dropping faster than expected. One engine still unstable. We may not reach the original rendezvous point if we take evasive maneuvers. He absorbed the information without panic. His mind ran through scenarios, mapping survival probabilities for each. The B-17 was a fortress in the air, but it was still a fragile ecosystem of man and machine. Every decision carried moral weight. Every adjustment meant someone's life might hang in the balance. A new wave of fighters approached from high altitude. They were experienced, relentless. Engaging them directly would risk total annihilation. Avoiding them meant straying from mission protocol, delaying objectives, possibly condemning other squadrons to danger. He studied the instruments, the weather, the enemy trajectory, and then the faces of his crew, illuminated in the cockpit's dim light. Each man trusted him, yet each depended on him to make the impossible choice: fight and risk all or evade and sacrifice strategic advantage. Options? The co-pilot asked softly, the question more rhetorical than procedural. Hold course, reduce altitude slightly, he replied. We will lure them into the flak zones below. Maintain defensive formation, conserve ammo. Our survival depends on patience, not aggression. He knew the gamble. Flak could be deadly, indiscriminate. He could lose men he had trained silently, watched over in countless flights, men who trusted his restraint and precision. But engaging the fighters directly without advantage would guarantee loss. He chose the lesser risk, the morally heavy path, survival through indirect strategy, not glory. The crew adjusted, though uneasily. They sensed the weight behind his decision, a decision made not from fear but from responsibility. The plane descended carefully, engines humming with tension, flaps adjusted to absorb turbulence, rudders responding to imperceptible commands. Every micro-movement was a lesson in restraint, every minor adjustment a statement of authority without declaration. Above them, enemy fighters dove, misjudging altitude, miscalculating angles as he had anticipated. Flak exploded around them, the sky trembling with each black puff, and still he guided the bomber, poised and precise. The crew fired selectively, only when targets were locked, following his unspoken rhythm. A tracer round tore across the wing, shaking the fuselage. The tail gunner cursed under his breath, but the pilot made no abrupt maneuvers. One more drastic move could destabilize the plane, push the crew past control or bring structural failure. He chose calculated risk over instinctive reaction. For a moment, memories surfaced, missions long past, comrades lost, failures he could never undo. He carried their ghosts silently, letting their absence guide his judgment, sharpening his restraint. The moral weight of command pressed heavily, heavier than any G-force, heavier than any flak explosion or enemy threat. Minutes stretched as the enemy adjusted. Some fighters broke off, realizing the bomber's descent into flak zones was deliberate. Others hesitated, unsure of the risk. The B-17's massive frame, guided by a mind that merged logic, experience and moral calculus, became a weapon of deterrence without direct confrontation. He glanced at the navigator, who met his eyes with silent acknowledgement. No words needed, they understood the gravity, the restraint, the morality in choosing survival over impulsive aggression. The decision had saved lives, perhaps more than any heroic attack could have. But it carried its cost. The mission would be delayed, coordination with Allied squadrons disrupted, and he alone would bear the responsibility if any consequences arose. A quiet rain began streaking the windshield, washing away the tension's visible edge but not its weight. The sky was still a battlefield, but for now the moral choice had granted them breathing space. The crew's eyes held recognition, a subtle awareness of the man they had underestimated. He was more than competence. He was judgment, restraint, authority wrapped in calm. In the cockpit, he allowed himself a single, almost imperceptible exhale. Not relief, he never allowed relief, but acknowledgement. Survival, strategy, and moral responsibility had aligned for this moment, even if the ultimate test was still ahead. The storm above continued to churn, but within the B-17, control had returned, tenuous but real. They would face the final confrontation soon. And when they did, the enemy would discover fully the man they had misjudged all along. The sky had turned a steel blue, clouds low and heavy, almost scraping the wings. The Luftwaffe had returned, a full squadron, methodical and ruthless. No more probing attacks. This was an assault meant to destroy. His hands rested lightly on the controls, eyes scanning the horizon, calculating, anticipating, every muscle in the cockpit tuned to survival and strategy. The crew braced. Every man understood the gravity of what was coming, but none knew the full measure of the pilot's capabilities. He had not revealed himself, not yet. And they trusted him. That trust, built quietly over the hours of flight, would be their lifeline. Enemy formation, bearing 090, altitude 18,000, the navigator reported. The voice was steady, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing, tracing flight paths, angles of descent, wind currents. Every movement had a purpose. Maintain altitude for 5 seconds, he said calmly. Prepare to descend in sequence. Focus fire only on locked targets. Engines 80%. The B-17 shuddered as flak erupted below, puffs of black smoke exploding like ink on the clouds. Enemy fighters split, some diving aggressively, others attempting to flank from above. He anticipated each maneuver, micro-adjusting throttle and rudder, the plane responding as if it were an extension of his body. A fighter dove from starboard. The tail gunner opened fire, tracer rounds cutting through rain-streaked clouds. The pilot banked gently, deploying a hidden flare system beneath the wing. The German misjudged trajectory, overshot and collided with another fighter. One down, silent, uncelebrated, yet decisive. Another wave approached from the rear. The co-pilot hesitated for a fraction of a second. He placed a calm hand on the co-pilot's shoulder, subtle but commanding. The gesture was small, almost invisible, yet it communicated certainty. Trust your hands, trust the plane, trust me. The co-pilot adjusted, aligning with the maneuvers seamlessly. He calculated the next strike in milliseconds. Enemy speed, distance, angle and position relative to flak fields. The B-17 descended gently, the hidden countermeasures activating, throwing off another attack. One by one, fighters miscalculated, collided or retreated. But he did not pause. Another tracer zipped across the fuselage, sparks flying. The navigator's voice was calm but tense. Multiple bogies converging on port wing. He leaned forward, scanning quickly. A split-second decision. Increase throttle slightly, bank right subtly, and time the maneuver to coincide with flak bursts below. The crew responded automatically, following the rhythm he set. The plane twisted imperceptibly, a graceful yet lethal dodge that sent the attacking fighters spiraling past, some retreating, some disabled by misjudged descent into flak zones. The cockpit was silent except for instruments, the hum of engines and the faint crackle of the radio. No shouting, no dramatics, just precise, calculated survival. The crew's eyes were wide, some holding disbelief, others holding dawning understanding. He was not just a pilot. He was authority incarnate in restraint, judgment, and quiet mastery. The final German fighter attempted a direct pass, banking sharply from above. He anticipated the move, aligning the B-17's slight descent with a flare release and minor engine adjustment. The enemy misjudged, clipped the turbulence and spiraled away, retreating into the clouds, defeated. The threat had passed. The sky was scarred with smoke, tracer trails and distant flak puffs, but the B-17 remained intact, the crew alive. No one celebrated. There was no cheering, no victory pose. Just silence, heavy and thick with relief and recognition. He allowed a quiet nod to himself, acknowledging not triumph but control, precision and survival. The crew's eyes met his, subtle understanding passing between them. They had been wrong to underestimate him. He was more than steady hands and calm voice. He had orchestrated war through restraint, skill and invisible authority. The final confrontation had ended, not with explosions or heroic theatrics, but with competence, calm and calculated action. The plane had survived. The crew had survived. And in that quiet survival, he had asserted the truth. Authority is measured not in noise or spectacle, but in the invisible weight of competence, restraint, and judgment under fire. The B-17 leveled out, engines humming steadily, the clouds thinning slightly ahead. The storm had passed, but the lesson remained. The underestimated pilot had revealed his true capability, not for recognition, not for glory, but because it was necessary. He had issued the commands. He had controlled the outcome. He had saved lives. And yet, outwardly, to anyone looking back at the battered bomber, he was still just a pilot. Silent. Calm. Unremarkable. The sky cleared slowly, a muted gray light spilling across the clouds. The B-17 floated steadily now, engines humming in their deep, resonant rhythm, carrying its battered frame and exhausted crew toward home. Silence had settled over the cockpit, heavier than any alarm or flak burst. No one spoke at first, not out of fear but out of reverent acknowledgement of what had just passed. He scanned the crew, faces pale but focused, eyes still processing the impossible. None of them celebrated. They did not need to. Recognition had never been his goal. Authority had been exercised quietly, decisively, and invisibly. The plane was intact. Everyone was alive. That was enough. The co-pilot adjusted the throttles, almost instinctively, aligning with subtle cues the pilot had left in the controls. It was a rhythm born of hours under his silent command, an unspoken trust, earned through precision, restraint, and unwavering competence. "Damage report," he said, voice calm, still carrying authority but without emphasis. "Minor flak punctures, port engine still unstable but holding," the engineer replied. "Good," he murmured. Nothing more. No congratulations. No relief. Control had been maintained, the storm passed. That was the work completed. The navigator leaned back, exhaling quietly. "Sir, none of us realized." His voice trailed, as if he were fumbling for words that could explain the revelation of who had been guiding them all along. He only nodded. Words were unnecessary. The crew understood now. Their underestimated pilot, the man they had quietly watched, thought ordinary, maybe even expendable, was the authority that had guided them through annihilation. But outwardly he remained exactly what they had always seen: calm, composed, unremarkable. Quiet strength concealed behind ordinary eyes. The B-17 began its slow descent toward base. Ground crews, unaware of the details of the engagement, would see only a battered bomber returning from a mission that had, officially, been chaotic but survivable. The true story, the unseen orchestration, the lethal precision, the moral choices and calculated risks, would remain unspoken, invisible to anyone outside that cockpit. He allowed himself a moment to glance at the instruments, to feel the hum of engines beneath his hands. Each movement, each micro-adjustment over the last hours, had carried consequences. Lives saved, planes preserved, enemies outmaneuvered. And yet, nothing in the world would acknowledge the skill, the restraint, the quiet authority he had exercised. That was not his concern. Survival had been enough. Competence had been enough. The clouds parted slightly, a faint line of sunlight reflecting off the fuselage, and for a brief instant the world seemed still. There were no cheers, no accolades, just the deep, steady hum of the B-17 and the breathing of men who had survived because of a quiet, unseen hand. He glanced once more at his crew. No smiles, no celebrations, just eyes that carried unspoken respect. That was all he allowed himself, the subtle acknowledgement that he had done what was required, nothing more. Quiet authority does not demand applause, it demands results. And so the bomber continued its final approach, descending into the base, engines steady, flaps responsive, and a story untold except to those who had lived it. The storm had passed. The threat had been neutralized. And he had issued the commands not for recognition, not for glory, but because it had been necessary. When the wheels finally touched the tarmac, there was no ceremony. The crew disembarked quietly, checking systems, logging damage, performing standard procedures. He followed, stepping down from the cockpit with the same calm demeanor as always, unnoticed by all but those who had flown with him. The sun broke through the clouds fully now, washing the airfield in pale, cold light. He walked among his crew, offering no praise, receiving none. The world would record only a mission survived. But the true story, of restraint, competence and authority wielded quietly, invisibly, decisively, remained theirs alone. He paused at the edge of the tarmac, looking up at the open sky. No recognition, no spotlight, no audience. Only the plane, the clouds, and the hum of engines fading into memory. A heavy calm settled over him, earned, complete, and unspoken. The storm had ended. He had commanded. He had controlled. And in silence he had prevailed. The airfield was calm, almost eerily so, a pale gray light stretching across hangars and tarmac. The B-17, battered but intact, taxied slowly to its assigned position. Engines still hummed their deep, steady rhythm, a reminder of the hours spent balancing life and death, strategy and survival. He stepped down from the cockpit without haste, without ceremony. The crew followed, moving quietly, their movements efficient, almost instinctive. They did not celebrate. They did not cheer. None of them spoke of the missions survived or the enemies outmaneuvered. Recognition had never been required. They had seen it in the way he had commanded, the way he had acted, and that had been enough. The navigator glanced at him briefly, a faint acknowledgement in the tilt of his head. No words were exchanged. The tail gunner adjusted his pack, eyes flicking once toward him, silently communicating respect. The co-pilot carried a subtle weight in his gaze, a combination of relief, understanding, and awe. They had trusted him when the odds were stacked against them, and he had delivered, not with noise or spectacle, but with precision, restraint, and unwavering competence. He walked among them slowly, observing the small signs of fatigue, the set of their shoulders, the tight lines around eyes, the quiet exhaustion that only a day spent under relentless threat could leave. Each man bore a story the world would never hear, just as he bore his own story silently. Command had a cost. Authority carried weight. But he carried it without complaint, without recognition, without expectation. He paused at the edge of the tarmac, looking toward the horizon where the clouds still lingered, dark and heavy in some places, sun breaking in others. The sky was beautiful, yet dangerous, reminding him that survival was never permanent. Every day, every mission, was a balance between risk and judgment, between restraint and decisive action. And every day he would carry that burden alone, silently, invisibly. A group of ground crew moved past him, checking equipment, logging details, performing standard procedures. They saw only routine. They had no idea of the decisions made in the air, the lives weighed in milliseconds, the moral choices calculated in silence. He allowed it. It had always been this way. Authority was never for applause. It was for results. And results had been achieved. The B-17 would be repaired, refueled, and ready for the next mission. The men would rest, maybe speak in quiet tones of what they had endured, but the truth of the storm, the precision, the restraint, the invisible guidance, would remain theirs alone. He would not tell. He would not seek validation. It was never needed. As he walked away from the plane, the cool wind lifted his jacket slightly, carrying the faint scent of fuel and metal. He inhaled it briefly, grounding himself in the reality of what had passed. There was pride, yes, but it was quiet, muted, internalized. Pride without display, acknowledgement without spotlight. That was the only way it had ever been, and the only way it would ever need to be. He reached the edge of the hangar line, stopping to glance once more at the open sky. Clouds were shifting, light and shadow intermingling, hinting at both calm and threat. The world above would always be dangerous. Enemy fighters, storms, and flak could appear without warning. But he would endure. He would command quietly, invisibly, decisively. And the men who depended on him would survive, even if they never fully understood how. Turning away, he continued along the tarmac, blending with the ground crew, unremarkable to anyone who might glance his way. His face showed no tension, no outward sign of the storm weathered. But within him, the weight of command, the cost of restraint, and the solitude of authority remained as it always would. The sky stretched overhead, indifferent, vast and endless. He walked under it, steady, silent, resolute. Life continued, dangerous and uncertain, but he had endured. He would continue to endure. And no one would ever need to know.